Hey there, I'm Robert John Hadfield with Audiomover. We're the company that takes your old audio and videotapes and turns them into digital. And we had this tape come in to the studio a day or two ago that had what is probably the most common problem that we have with cassette tapes whenever we're digitizing them. There's one of the things we check on every tape before we play it because it's the most common problem that happens with tapes, and it's something called the pressure pad. And I'm going to show you where this is. If you look at the underside of the tape here, you'll see that this tape doesn't have any leader. It doesn't look like, interestingly. But you'll see right underneath there, there's this little spot. It's kind of a little mount. There's some copper. I'm going to hold it down. You can see that right there. Well, there's supposed to be a little piece of felt, and you can tell, I don't know if you can tell on the camera, but it's fallen off. And what happens is there's this little piece of felt, and over time, just like any adhesive, eventually after 20, 30 years, it just breaks down and then the little thing falls off. I'll show you what it's supposed to look like. If you see this right here, that is what that mount's supposed to look like, and then it's got this little piece of felt right on the top of it. Hopefully you can see that. And you'll see that in here, that little piece of felt is not there. And without that, the tape won't sound right. And you'll see the way this works is whenever you push play in your tape deck, the play head, the thing that reads the tape, is supposed to kind of push in like this. And then the pressure between that pad, that little piece of felt, and the head together, they kind of sandwich the tape in between the two. And then when it plays and the tape goes from one side to the other, it makes a nice solid connection between the tape and the playhead, and that makes it sound good. And if that pressure pad falls off, when the playhead goes and pushes up on it, it doesn't get as solid a connection, and as a result, the tape oftentimes won't sound as good. And it's funny because people will say, man, my tape doesn't sound as good, and normally the reason is because that pad has fallen off, and it's nothing you did wrong. It's just over time, the adhesive wears down because they're usually just glued on. In this case, this one here, it's hard for you to tell, but there's these kind of little hooks on this one that hold it in place, probably because they knew that 40 years later after they made the tape that we took this out of, that it would, I don't know why but anyway, they will eventually break down. We've had projects, because people send in boxes and boxes of tapes to us. And we've had projects where we've opened up the box and taken the tapes out, and the whole bottom of the box is just filled with these little pieces of felt because they didn't realize that their tapes had, because of the aging, that all these pressure pads were just falling off. So we check for that before we put a tape in the tape deck, because if it's not there, it just won't sound good. And we have bags and bags filled with these little pads to replace them in case a tape that you send in is missing them and it needs to be replaced, and we want to make sure you get as good a copy as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up, and normally one of the ways you can do this, because you may not have all the different pieces that we have here, is that you can literally just take the tape like so, remove this, kind of pull this out of the way, and then put like just a little dab of glue. I mean, we'll use like this, and just put a dab of glue right there. And then if you can find the little pad, usually they'll be just sitting in the case with the tape, and after it fell out, sometimes it's even just kind of falling around inside there. Just set it back on there, and then that'll take care of it. And that's an easy way to do it without opening up. Now, once you put the glue on the adhesive and you let it sit for a while, then you have to wait. You have to wait for a while before you can play it again, obviously. Normally, although we do that sometimes, especially if we can find it, in this case, we couldn't find the little pad. And so what I prefer to do is, since we have a bunch of these, it's just easier, less time consuming in some cases. We don't have to sit around and wait for the glue, and to open it up, take that one out, and just put this one in. These are probably 90% universal. most tapes you're going to see this is exactly what's in it, this little thing. And what we do is we have a lot of clients that will send in literally thousands of tapes to us. And once we digitize them, they don't even want them back. Or they'll just ask if we can take care of them, because what we do then, if somebody sends in tapes and they don't want them back, then we just take all these parts and pieces out of those tapes so that people like you, when you send your tape in, if you need a part, then we've got, we have tons of them left over from projects where organizations or people have sent in thousands of tapes, and we just keep we basically scavenge all the parts out of them so that we can fix other people's tapes. Like if you were to send one in and it needed a part, then we have them. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this done. So tapes, audio tapes, most of the time will have 5 screws. This is not always true. Most of the time this is true. And they're usually Phillips. I think it's the BASF brand. They were flathead, and I think they only did 4, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember for sure. And also, most of the time, the screws will be on side A, but I think it was BASF where that was different, or side B. But usually that's how you identify side A and side B. You can tell by where the screws are. And it's really just a matter of removing these 5 screws, and then it comes apart pretty easily. I'm going to reel that back in. Okay. There's 1, and this is 2. And they don't always just pop out. Sometimes you have to... kind of gets itself stuck right there. Well, we'll deal with that in a second. There's 3, third one that popped out. There's 4, and then there's the 5th one. Okay, and even if we don't take the screw all the way out, usually it's open enough that you can just lift this top off. And I don't want to come off, so I'm just going to pull this off now. That one's still a little in there. All right, there we go. Okay, so the top just lifts off like so. And actually, I'm going to flip it over. There, you can kind of see what happens. There's this little gasket that sits right there. And this is most cassette tapes will have this little gasket on either side. You can see the one right there, and you can see it right there. And this just basically keeps the tape from rubbing on the plastic shell. Now, a lot of these gaskets have little ridges that kind of emboss, so it kind of has this little bit of embossing coming out either direction, and that actually keeps the tape. It'll help it spool on smoother than this one did. And that's this one. The reason it's a little bit more ridgy than others is because it doesn't have that embossing, which basically kind of sandwiches the tape as it's playing, and then it just gives it that little bit of pressure so that it spools up nice and smooth. This one doesn't. It's not really a big deal, but. And you can see, interestingly, this one doesn't have any leader. It just looks like just the oxide tape connected directly to the spool. And there's not a lot of yellowing. A lot of times what you'll see is these spools, especially on a white tape like this, the photo degradation, it'll start turning yellow. Different polymers were worse than some were worse than others. If you have any plastic in your life, you've probably seen white plastic that turns yellow. And not only does it turn yellow, but it actually gets brittle. And what will happen sometimes is these spools, these reels, will actually, as they get yellow and they get brittle, the plastic that's holding it in place will actually break. This one probably wouldn't have that problem just because of the way that it's built. They're all a little bit different, but you can see that that's how it's attached to this reel. It goes underneath this little piece of plastic that's kind of, you can see this little hole there that kind of, the tape goes underneath it, and they push that in, and that's what holds it to the reel. And you can see there's another one on that side, and that's how that works. So anyway, this right here you'll see that that kind of floats there, this little magnetic shield. And then right there is our little pressure pad and mount. You can see how it just kind of floats there. And you'll see it's interesting because it looks like this one didn't necessarily fall off, but it was almost like it just wore off. It's kind of crunchy. It's got, you might be able to even hear that. Yeah, so anyway, this one, something went wrong. And as a result, because it doesn't have that soft piece on there anymore, it just doesn't work. It won't work right. And when we play this tape, it wouldn't sound correct. So that's why we're doing this. Whenever tapes come into the studio, before we put them in a tape deck, that's the first thing we look for is that pressure pad connected. And interestingly, it doesn't happen very often, but when we'll get boxes where we'll pull the tapes out and there's literally pressure pads, like I may have already said this, but they're just all over the bottom of the box because they've fallen off, because they've just aged. And you'll sometimes be playing it and you won't realize it, but it'll fall off while it's playing, and then it'll just be lost forever. It'll fall down into the tape deck. And anyway, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this one that's fully functional, and I'm just going to set it down in place. Now, the way this works is you can see these little posts right there. And then you can see these little, I don't know what you call that. It's just kind of this little ridge. And these hooks sit in between like so. And that's it. It doesn't connect. There's nothing holding it there other than just it kind of sets and it has those hooks around the edge, and then it just kind of floats in that spot. That's really all there is to it. Now, when you push play on the tape deck, the head goes up like this, and you can see it has just that little bit of give, and then when the tape goes across there, then it has a nice solid connection with the playhead, and that gets you that's what makes it sound good. Anyway, so that's the extent of the repair. And like I said, what you can do, and I wouldn't recommend it in this case because of, I don't know what that, whatever the thing was, it looks like it was kind of the felt or the pad was kind of a mess anyway. So you probably wouldn't want to put that one back on here. But you can just go, if you wanted to do this yourself, you can just go to a thrift store, or you can actually order still cassette tapes online. You can just take the pad out of any of them. Like I said, it's generally, you'll see here that it's really just the same thing. It's mostly universal. There were some tapes that did it a little bit differently, that the whole mechanism was a little different, but most of the time this is how they're set up. So now we're going to take this gasket, put it back here, and these also just kind of float in place. And then that's interesting. There's some sort of, what that is, some sort of adhesive or something that was in there. Doesn't seem to have an impact on the tape though. And then what we do is we're just going to set this. Oh yeah, one other thing I wanted to point out. If you watch some of the other videos, I'm going to take this back out for a second to show you. I've made other videos where you can see these little reels, how they're connected. I'm going to take this off so you can kind of see it. This is kind of interesting. Sometimes these reels have a little metal post that kind of, it kind of just goes down into a hole, and that's what holds the reel. And this reel, it just spins. And then it basically helps the tape just move freely as it goes from one side to the other. In this case, what they've done, you can see that there's actually a post in the plastic itself. I like these a lot more. They're a lot easier to work with. Sometimes, like I said, there won't be a plastic post connected. This will be a little piece of metal that actually just kind of pushes down into a little hole, and then the thing sits over the top, and then that can get a little messy working with that. Anyway, but that little reel right there, a wheel, and this thing just kind of spins freely as the tape moves past it. But these are a lot easier to work with because it's part of the plastic. And then the way the tape goes, it'll go around that post right there, over the wheel, through over the playhead, and then back over around that way. And that's how it works. Goes from one side to the other. It's a pretty little simple mechanism. But anyway, they're all kind of a little bit different on the inside, but this is pretty standard how these things look on the inside. All right, so we're going to put this gasket back in place, and we'll close this thing back up. And then what we'll be able to do is we'll go put it on a digitizing machine. And I don't know what this client asked for. A lot of different people have different needs. A lot of people, the thing does not want to sit on there quite right. We have different options where some people want MP3s and some people want CDs. And it just kind of, there we go. And it kind of depends on the person. MP3s are the most common thing these days. And what's kind of cool is that not only can we, a lot of people want the MP3 put on a USB drive, and then we send the USB drive with the MP3 back to them. But some people, we just put them on Google Drive, and then they just download it. The USB drives are kind of fun because what happens is people will get them for Christmas events they're having, family reunions, whatever, and they'll have some old recordings of, you'd be amazed all the different things people have recordings of, and then they'll just distribute them to the family. A lot of times in those cases, it's people that have recorded interviews with grandparents and parents and people that have passed on, and then they want to hand out these little thumb drives to everybody in the family so they can have copies of it. But still, some people want CDs still. So we can kind of do whatever here in the studio. Anyway, we'll just go throw that away. But now this tape will work perfectly. And you can see right there that you can now see that the pad's in there. This is the old one. We took that out. And you can see that. And so now when we push play, the playhead's going to go in like that. And it's on that little copper mount, and there's just enough give so that it just gets that little bit of pressure onto the playhead so that as it goes across, it'll have a nice solid connection and you'll get a good sound. And so we're going to go run this through. I'll go put this on a digitizing machine. Somebody will run this through, and then based on whatever the client wanted, we'll send them back either a CD or a thumb drive or an MP3, or put it over Google Drive or whatever it was they requested. But anyway, that right there is the most common problem that we have to deal with cassette tapes, is that pressure pad. That is the thing that's the most normal, common thing that happens. And if you have tapes that you still play possibly and they just don't sound right, you may not even realize that is supposed to be there. And it's worth just taking a look at your tape. And if you send tapes into us, if you have tapes that you want to get converted to digital and you send them to us, go to audiomover.com. And you don't have to worry about if you don't have if you see the pressure pads missing, we'll notice. And just send it into us, and then we'll replace it, and then we'll get it to sound as good as possible. These tapes they're not intended to last forever. And it's interesting, this tape, you probably can't really see it in the light, but you can kind of, I don't know if depending on how I move this, you can see there's a little ridge right there. And what happens is as the tape ages, you might even be able to see how it's a little bit warped in spots. What happens is over time, the oxide, and because it's on a polymer of tape, some sort of tape, plastic, just over time it breaks down and it warps. Part of the reason you need to have that pressure pad so that this warped tape will have a nice solid connection, but it just won't last. and the oxide will start coming off eventually, and they just break down. So it's a really good idea if you have tapes, and if you have the means to do it, you should digitize them. And if you don't have the means to do it, send them to us, and we'll get your tapes digitized for you, so you won't lose those memories, the recordings you have of things. I mean, it's interesting, all the different things that get sent into us. And we don't have time to sit and listen to them, but I know that from some of the labels that we see, I mean, things like birthdays and bar mitzvahs and interviews of family members and sermons, church events, just unbelievable. And then we get things sent in from government agencies. I mean, that actually, over the years, churches and government agencies have been our biggest clients. We had one government agency where they sent in 115,000 cassette tapes, if you can believe it. And that's the biggest one we've ever done. But I mean, we've had other projects where it's 30,000, sometimes 5,000, 2,000, depending on the organization. We've even had some individuals that'll have 1,000 tapes, believe it or not, just of things they've documented their whole life, and they have all these different recordings of different things, audio and videotapes. Anyway, that's it. So we're going to go get this thing digitized, sent off to the client, and please like the video, subscribe to the channel, all the things. And if you have any questions, leave comments, questions. And of course, if you have tapes that you need to get digitized, whether they're audio or videotapes, we'd love to work with you. Go to audiomover.com and you can start an order there, or give us a call. A lot of people, when they're working on these things, they really want to hear a voice. And just call the studio. There's a really good chance I'll be the one picking up the phone. It's not a big company, but we do big projects. And so we have a staff here that works on this stuff, and we'd love to help you out. Anyway, with that, hope you have a fantastic day. Thanks for watching.